Hello everyone, welcome back. Year 5 Season 1 has been live, coming on for nearly a week now, and having played the new Descent mode, not only in the live game but in both phases of the PTS as well, and having beat Nemesis solo on my first run in the live game, I've got quite a few tips that I think may help you if you're having some difficulty. Drop a like and subscribe down below if you find any of these tips helpful, and let's jump right into it. In no particular order then, the first one I want to start with are your choice of skills. One of the biggest issues as a solo player is every enemy is aggro on you only. So my biggest tip is picking skills that provide some kind of distraction. The decoy skill is perhaps the best, if not one of the best for this, and I've had great success with this particular skill in getting far in the Descent mode and also beating Nemesis as well. Striker drone is great as well. If you can give yourself that extra 5 to 10 seconds where you can avert aggro, this gives you a window to either reposition or apply more damage, or perhaps you need to get a medkit off. I found this particularly helpful at the Nemesis fight, where I found Nemesis to be very aggressive most of the time, and of course do a ton of damage. Having a decoy, for example, would allow you to move and take a breather should you need it. The other skill I'd recommend is the Revive Hive. I found that in some instances you could have the best position, you could really be on top of everything, you could listen to all of these tips and have everything going in the right direction, but it only takes one bombardier drone or one suicide drone to change that in a second. So having that Revive Hive in your back pocket to make sure that if that does happen, that you'll be able to carry on and it's ultimately going to save you, is really key, and I think it's absolutely a must in terms of skills that you need to get far in the Descent mode. Moving on then, and weapons. Of course, a skill and a weapon are your first choice when beginning the mode. Descent has a variation of small, medium and large rooms, all of which, they're all very square. Now for me, I found having one close range weapon and one long range weapon to be the best choices. I know that's going to sound obvious to a lot of you, but for some people that might not be so obvious, so that is for you guys. Personally, I'd always choose an SMG over an AR or a shotgun for close range, and then for long range, I think it really depends on how efficient you are with a sniper. PC players will ultimately find using a sniper easier than console players. I play on console. I don't find sniping particularly easy. So I personally recommend a rifle like the M1A over a sniper. Plus, an M1A not only does a ton of damage, but is also very forgiving if you miss shots. And if you do get in a close range gunfight and for whatever reason you've not reloaded your close range weapon, which I'm sure will happen often, it's happened to me a few times, the M1A can do the job at that close range, whereas a sniper, you're likely not to be very successful. At least you won't be as successful as you would be using the M1A. So the M1A is very good for medium to long range, but it can be used for close range as well, which is my number one recommended weapon in the Descent game mode. Moving on then, and with each new room you get the choice of new talents. I found very little value in choosing utility talents and would almost always use either offensive or defensive talents. If you do have to pick a utility talent, perhaps because you went into a room where it was only utility talents, there are situations where it is only the choice that you can go for. I found something like steady-handed to be great, a great choice, as the accuracy buff actually makes a huge difference when it comes to long-range fights. I found that in those fights, quite often the M1A, it does kick a little bit. It is very accurate anyway, but having that almost that perfect accuracy which you get from steady-handed really does make those battles much easier. When it comes to defensive talents, I found picking talents that give me back armor as very useful, and in many occasions I found those kind of talents to be life-saving. Talents like Entrench, which gives you armor back for headshots. I believe there's Preservation as well, which is also a very good talent. I actually think Preservation was one of those talents that I kept stacking on top of each other. That gave you back a ton of armor. In terms of offensive talents, I found most of the time I was fighting from cover at a distance, and didn't engage in close range fights that much. So I found investing in talents that supported that playstyle worked best. Talents like Composure, Vigilance is great, giving huge damage as long as you don't take damage, and being in cover, the chances of you taking damage are obviously less than being outside of cover. But any talent really that's going to support the playstyle of long range in cover, I found to be the best going forward. Now, at the end of the first arena, you are given the choice of 3 exotic talents. If the choice is available, I encourage you to pick Plague of the Outcasts, the Pestilence exotic talent. I found this talent, this exotic talent, to be incredibly powerful. Quite often seeing NPCs go down from the tick damage. It was also very, very strong against Nemesis. If you're just getting off one shot every 10 seconds, just to keep that debuff going, then you're ultimately just doing damage to Nemesis over a long period of time. And as long as you're able to stay away from Nemesis, using maybe your distraction talents or whatever, then ultimately that tick damage will eventually take down Nemesis. Even a Nemesis that might have some kind of skill that would give them back health. I tried other exotic talents, for example, the Bullet King talent, with the Endless Magazine, and many other talents, but I just found that Plague worked the best by far. So I would highly recommend it. What I will say as well is the AoE for this is really, really great. There's going to be times as a solo player when you go into a very small room where you might have 7 or 8 enemies spawn at one time. You're going to have bombardier drones in the back. You're going to have enemies led on the floor, just shooting you constantly, and it's going to be quite hectic. So being able to put out a couple of shots here and there and getting that tick damage off, just take out that one enemy, get that tick damage off to the next enemy, and watch it escalate is really, really strong. The AoE damage from Plague is great. Of course, at the end of each arena, you also get to increase your offensive, defensive, or utility power. I never invest in utility, and find myself picking defensive first and then alternating between that and offensive, so that your defensive is always that one step further. Utility has no value, so offensive and defensive always. Now, once you beat an arena and move on to the next loop, you have access to the lobby shop. I highly recommend you purchase the armor kit capacity before anything else. Max that one out. I believe it's a max of 3. Ammo capacity is important, of course, but I never found myself running out of bullets in solo. I've heard in group play, actually, that's more common. So I'd probably move from the medkits straight to purchasing an extra offensive or defensive talent. Of course, if you find yourself running out of ammo, then get the ammo first, obviously. I personally never found doing damage much of an issue when I was playing through, especially in kind of pretty much all of the arenas. I never found doing damage much of a problem. What I did find a problem sometimes was survivability. So I always make sure that I pick an extra defensive talent before I ended up picking any offensive talent. And I think, in fact, on the runs that I did do where I beat Nemesis, I always picked defensive more than once. So I did defensive, then offensive before, just to try and get that survivability up, because the survivability is difficult, especially when you get to Nemesis, where one shot and you're going to be in trouble. Lastly, then, each room will have a difficulty. The higher the difficulty, the less percentage you earn towards reaching Nemesis, allowing you to accumulate more talents and power for the final fight. From my experience, however, I don't think it really matters in the end. If you have no issues with any difficulty, then just pick the rooms that offer offensive and defensive talents only. If you prefer the lower difficulty rooms, that's fine, of course, but just note that if those rooms offer utility talents, you could be wasting the chance to get good offensive or defensive talents. So I'd always recommend you try and do whatever difficulty is going to achieve that. If you've got a distraction skill, a revive hive, if you've got 3 or 4 med kits, an SMG and a rifle, you're pretty much set up to take on any difficulty. What I always do when I go into a room is I immediately scout out that room, find those doors. Obviously, as you go up the loops, then all of the doors highlight, but always try and get the highest bit of cover and try and get as much cover around you. That's my recommendation. I'm sure you guys know how to take on NPCs. I don't think that's going to be much of an issue for you guys, but if you've got all of that stuff going, then really I don't see any issue with any of you guys taking on the higher difficulty. And yeah, I'm sure all of you guys can do it, no problem. That's the end of this one though. If there is anything else that you want to ask me, DM me on Twitter at EpicSlayers, or you can leave a comment down below. I do plan on doing a video of the pros and cons of the Descent mode, because there's some really good stuff, but there's some real issues that need addressing, issues present in the PTS that have not gone away, so stay tuned for that one. Until the next video, Epic out.